we're getting ready. For those of you, I'm Gwen Jacobs, Director of Cyber Infrastructure and Co-Director of the Data Science Institute. I think most folks know me, but you may not know Dr. June Zhang, who is our speaker for today. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about her, and then she will start her seminar. So June is an assistant professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department here at UH Manoa. She received her BS and highest honors in electrical and computer engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology and a master's degree in electrical engineering from Stanford. She received her PhD in electrical and computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon in 2015 and worked as a postdoctoral fellow in the Division of Viral Hepatitis at the CDC. Very cool. Her research interests are in network science, graph signal processing, and complex dynamical systems, such as the spread of epidemics and information. And the title of her talk is Modeling the Evolution of News Events Using Dynamic Knowledge Graphs. And June says that she's interested in taking questions during her seminar. So if you'd like to ask her a question, just please either shout it out, raise your hand, or put it in the chat. And I will turn it over to you now, June. Welcome.
Good. Thank you, Gwen. Thank you for the invitation. I'd be very curious about the Data Science Institute. Let's see, share screen. Okay. Oh boy, it's been a while since I used PowerPoint. Oh, there you go. Okay, so just a quick blurb about my research interests, which just to capture. So I'm interested in novel dynamical system modeling. So mostly mathematics. I do like mathy type of things, but particularly very large scale interacting type of systems like the spread of disease and information. I've only started doing data science. I don't actually consider myself as a pure data science person. I'm more of a system modeling person. But the talk today is going to be my first major project involving data, and we've been learning a lot. But you know, the areas of data science I think I fit best in is this idea of network science. So these taking data which are in this shape of these very large networks and doing analysis, and this new field in signal processing, which we call graph signal processing. And recently I started also getting into more computational interests, again, because in the goal is to analyze these very large scale systems. I'm actually interested in these methods are called Monte Carlo linear algebra methods. So they're so big, these systems, that we cannot study them exactly. We have to use Monte Carlo methods. And it turns out that you can use Monte Carlo methods to solve linear algebra problems, not just sampling probability distributions. So I have two funded projects currently alongside some other things I work on. Non-funded but of interest. The first one is with my colleague, Professor Anders Holzmadsen, and my student, Mojtaba. And that one is more of an information theoretic sort of thing, where we're looking at developing new lossless compressions for graph structures. So there's a lot of decades of compression research in compressing sequences. But the thing is, now everybody's interested in these graphs. But graphs are not sequences, so there's some novelty and difficulty involving graphs. And it turns out that if you can find a way to describe graphs very efficiently, you can actually use this in model selection for like multivariate Gaussians or things which had sort of an underlying graph structure in them. And then my second project is with my student Hongyan Zhang, and that's the topic of this talk, which is the modeling of the evolution of news using Hawk's process and dynamic graphs. So I'm always happy to collaborate and to listen to people. I have a pretty broad background, if you can, I worked a little bit in every field. And again, I do math, so I feel like I could, as long as somebody can give me like something in a mathematical framework, I feel like I could like slot myself in there. So I'm always happy to collaborate. And this project is sort of like outside my in a way, my comfort zone. There's a lot of NLPs and things, natural language processing and things involved in it. So if you have any ideas about this project, I'd be happy to hear it. And this is a work in progress, so I don't have the best, greatest results, but it's currently work in progress. Okay. Okay, so what's the problem? Well, okay, so the problem is I'm interested in the modeling of how news events are reported, right? So how this thing is reported over time. And the general idea of these sort of things, of course, everybody is interested is for fake news detection, right? Everybody talks about, oh, how do we detect misinformation and fake news? That itself is a very difficult problem. One is to characterize, it's very difficult to characterize misinformation and fake news, right? Some things are very blatant, but overall it's kind of it's hard to mathematically define. And then the other thing is to basically to kind of understand, the news cycle these days, right? A lot of people get the news from the internet, but the way things are published on the internet, it's presumably fairly different from the traditional way of paper publication, right? So so what I'm interested in is in this dynamical system of how this thing changes in time. And there's been a lot of work, of course, in this area, especially in the area like related to social media, right? So there's tons of papers on analyzing how the spread of misinformation happens on Twitter, right? So you have this Twitter dynamic of seeing these tweet accounts that they say like like 90% of the fake tweets originate from those. So there's been a lot of work in social media and everything. So for my particular project, I've been focusing less on social media and more on just news media. So the major news publications like BBC, CNN, and so forth. Okay, so the basic outline of my talk is first I'm going to talk about the data we've been collecting. And if anybody wants access to this data, please feel free to ask me. I think it's a fairly novel data set compared to what's out there on the internet. And then of course, the most important once you have the data is cleaning. So my poor grad student, Honggen, has spent a lot of time and effort on cleaning the data. And it's extremely important. And we've learned so much about how to clean the data. What kind of stuff you could get when you have this data and things like that. And then I'll talk about, which is to me the more interesting, but certainly harder once if you don't clean the data, it's about the mathematical representation of these news text as a knowledge graph and as a multivariate time series. So we can do these mathematical modeling. And then I'll talk about some applications that we try to do with this. So the general framework is we collect this raw text from the internet. Again, we web scrape, lots of cleaning going on. And we turn these things into what is called triplets. So instead of keeping the entire sentence, there are these existing NLP algorithms that turn these things into sort of like a what they call head relationship tail. So object relationship, subject relationship object. So the basic structure of English language. And then my interest is in graphs. So we also turn that into this thing called knowledge graph or RDF graph. So there is this a lot of these graph structure representation of data. So that's the general idea. So regarding how we collected the news, so we did it by keyword search. So we learned, oh, this is one event that happens. So we're going to use this particular set of keywords. And then we're going to basically, we use this event search engine that's going to search through all the, cross through all the articles on the internet that's related to this particular event. And then we use like Python packages to extract from the web scraped HTML, the raw text, and then some of the metadata. Right, so there is a lot of cleaning because some of the time the raw text from the HTML will include images, embedded videos, ads, and so forth. And when we do this raw search for keyword, the thing is tangentially some articles have something to do with this event, but it could be that it has very little to do with the event, right? So there is some imperfection in how we obtain the data. But the thing is, this is very, the novelty of this is this sort of search is done every single day on web scrape. So for one particular event, not only do I have articles related to that event, but I have articles per day related to that event because I'm interested in the dynamic of how the coverage changes over time, right? So this was, the actual web scraping was done before the pandemic. So we covered 3 events, which was major in the news at that time. So one was the Jussie Smollett case. from 2019. And then the other one was the flight 752, the Iran plane, well, the plane that was the Ukrainian plane that was shot down. And then we actually, in the beginning of COVID, we did some web scraping for COVID news. We had to put a stop to that because there were so many articles written each day on COVID that were just like, we can't analyze this. This is too much. So we put a stop to that. But you can see from the data set that it's, from, again, so there's thousands of news outlets. These could be blogs, right? So news, they're not always major. So news outlets are writing articles on this particular event. So, there are a couple thousand sources and then tens of thousands of articles. So this is, for me, the largest data set I've ever had to deal with, because it is quite, even though because it's text, so it doesn't take much storage, but it does take a lot of processing, right? So again, we gave up on COVID because it was just way too many articles with the keyword COVID that, and this was even, maybe this was the beginning of the masks debate. I mean, this was before the vaccine and everything else just blows up on it. But I think it might be interesting to go through that data. Anyway, so here is the like a visualization of the news we have. So the articles in the Jesse Smollett. So in the y-axis is kind of like the article count. So you see in the beginning, there was a lot of articles written. And then of course the interest kind of dies down, less articles gets written. And then in the middle was the case where he was he arrested? It came that they think he was lying. So there was resurgence of interest. And then of course it has petered out afterward. So on the left is the breakdown of news articles from the major news outlets. So like Reuters, Wall Street Journal, BBC and CNN. And on the right is the graph of all the news articles we collected. So what you can see is actually the major news outlets consist of a very small percentage of articles that was published regarding any particular news. The bulk of it is probably these, I mean, it could be foreign newspapers that we have never, or at least I have never read, that was publishing in English, but the bulk of it is not these non-major news sources. So who knows who's actually reading this, but it was surprising to see that there were like the majority of the collected text was from non-major news sources. So it's this dynamic I'm interested in, but not just in the article counts, right? So certainly this we can have a mathematical model describing the dynamics of article counts, but I'm also more interested in the language, the information content associated with these articles, so that's why we also collected the raw text. So if I'm just interested in article counts, I don't need the raw text, but I'm interested in the raw text as well. So that's the Jesse Smollett case. And then the Iranian plane case, that was like maybe a normal type news in that there was, peak in beginning, not that many people know about it because it was an international incident. Then there was a peak of interest. And then of course, very quickly, a disinterest in that the news fades away. So, but again, majority of articles out on the internet is not from what we think of as the major US news sources. And then COVID coverage, so here actually, with data, even with visualization of data, so those of you who really work with data all the time, so we realize, oh, those are weekends, right, which has distinctly different pattern of publication than the weekdays. So then we had to go, oh no, we have to throw out the weekends. It doesn't, otherwise it's going to always think this weird 7-day cycle. It's hard to work with that and everything. And whether this peak, like, why is there a peak that day? I don't know. It could be somehow there was a error in the data set or something, but that was something weird, right? So, but working with real data was really, it was a learning experience for me to realize, oh gosh, you have to really clean the data and really get to know and understand the data set. Okay, but that's the data set we have, and is along with the raw text. So again, I'm interested in the text itself as well, right? So many decades of research in natural language processing. But because there's so many articles, right? Each day there was hundreds and thousands of articles. We had to use very quick, fast algorithm methods to extract information. So what my student did was he used this algorithm called Reverb, which again is sort of basically take your text, and then you try to extract these subject, verb, object, basic English relationship patterns, right? So this thing is known as head, relationship, tail. So it does this very simply. It's not a very smart system. It finds the verbs, and then it looks to the left for your presumed, like, most likely subject. And it looks to the right for your most likely object. And it's not always a single word. Sometimes it could be a very long phrase. So the object could be a phrase, the subject could be a phrase, the relationship is a phrase. But it's sort of one way of extracting some information from the raw natural text, right? So it does, of course, humans write things, it does trip the computer up, right? So there's a lot of post processing that you have to do after you extract this head, relationship, tail. So here are just some basic examples of what this algorithm can extract. And from a human perspective, these are very, a human would not summarize the sentence this way, right? But one thing is pronouns trip it up, right? We, as humans, we understand pronouns refers to something that was talked about prior, but the computer doesn't. It just thinks, oh, the word it is probably the object, but then it has to do something, you have to do something smart to associate it with the country Iran, right? So there's a lot of these, and these are all standard problems, of course, in NLP, where people have studied in trying to build these relationships between pronouns and things, right? Because again, natural text is not it's not that easy for a machine to understand. So we use standard NLP libraries to do these replace pronouns, find and replace abbreviations. We have to remove stop words, like to computer acronyms, the US, America, these are all completely different things. But as a human, we all know these, of course, referring to the same thing, right? So you have to use lots and lots of cleaning steps to try to get as good a clean set of this triples from the data as you can. And it's never satisfying. Right, because again, you're asking machines to interpret natural language. It is quite a difficult task. But this is, it's not the most glamorous of tasks. I don't think you can publish in this because these are all, classic things that people have been doing for decades in NLP. But again, this is super critical in order to do any sort of analysis, is to be able to remove these duplicate words and replace these pronouns. Right. Okay, so. But my interest is in graphs. So again, we have the triples. What we want to do is to turn these things into knowledge graphs. So again, I think knowledge graph to me seems more like a buzzy business. I'm not a CS person, so to me it seems more like a business type of thing where they use this to say it's a data. It's really a database. But the idea is it's a directed graph database where you have the nodes represent entities, and then the edge direction represents some relationship, right? So for us, we can use knowledge graph to represent the triples. So what the head node, the starting node will be the head or the subject, and the tail node would be the tail, which is the object, and then the edge itself will be the relationship, right? So any triples you have, you can distill it into this knowledge graph or directed graph structure. So when I have this news article over time, these set of news articles over time, from each group of news articles, I can use an NLP algorithm and extract these triples. And then every day from the triples, I can build a knowledge graph representation, right? So if I want to look at how all these news articles change over time, basically I have this set of knowledge graphs which are changing over time, right? Presumably they're getting bigger, first of all, because I have more articles and more text out of it. But then the structure itself is also changing, right? So the thing is, then the structure of this knowledge graph is correlated with the information that's in the text, right? Not only do I have, of course, it's related to the count of articles, but the knowledge graph in the head, tail, the head, tail, head, relationship, tail structure that incorporates the information, right? Some sort of information content from the text. The bad side, the downside of doing this is, so even when you talk with graph people, it's very difficult to model a dynamic graph. It's actually very difficult to work with graphs in general because graphs are very large combinatorial size structures. And as far as there is no perfectly satisfying mathematical description of how a graph changes over time. So this is asking, like, we're trying to come up with a model that can maybe study that. The other issue is that the knowledge graph is also a multigraph in the sense that, so because this is text, I'm sorry, someone is knocking on my door. I have to go check.
It's okay. No problem.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was I've been having some air conditioning problems in my office, so they're sending someone out here. But hey, that backwards, right? So this graph actually, this is a bad example because it doesn't show a multigraph. So what a multigraph is a graph where two nodes can have multiple edges, right? So for example, if I have subject and object, it could be that there's two different relationships. So a graph that is a multigraph is one where there's multiple edges between two nodes. Anyway, so but from a graph modeling perspective, a multigraph is just harder, again, mathematically harder to work with because now you have multiple edges between nodes. So but the point is, yeah, so that's the thing is we turn these triples into knowledge graph. I read my end goal is to understand, to model this dynamic of how these how this knowledge graph changes, but it is a very difficult mathematical problem. So just to give you an idea of what this knowledge graph look like, sorry, you can't really see the words, right? So of course, with each node is associated with a phrase, and the edges are actually associated with a phrase, but we cannot write the phrase on the edges because then it will just be a complete cluster of, you can't visualize it. But the idea is that this knowledge graph does grow over time as the number of articles increase, but it's the growth process that I'm interested in, right? Okay, so the thing is, very complicated structure. You want to see something mathematically, you cannot work with this very complicated structure. So the first thing is, unfortunately, I have to discard the words that's associated with the nodes and the edges because I can't mathematically describe the words as well, right? So the first thing is it's a page out of the network science people book, which is that it's the structure of the graph that's of interest. The thing that's associated with the structure, of course, we know that's important, but that is very difficult to account for right now. So first, we're just going to study the structure of this knowledge graph. So what I want to do is I have this knowledge graph. I want to model how the structure changes over time, disregarding what each of the phrases or the words that's associated with the edges and the nodes. And then you can do, because of that, you can do like basic network science type analysis of how the structure of this knowledge graph looks and everything. Anyway, so there are some, it has its own peculiarities, right? Because of the way this knowledge graph is built from these triples. So for example, it tends to have this hub structure where, you know, this node again is associated with a phrase or a word. So for example, in news articles on Jussie Smollett, the phrase Jussie Smollett is going to be like a central hub node, right? Because there's going to be many sentences that's going to be Jussie Smollett is an actor, Jussie Smollett is arrested, or Jussie Smollett is attacked or was attacked, and so forth, right? So you do expect to see these hub structures because these represents the phrases associated with very key words or events or names, right? Okay, so the next thing is you have this and you can do some basic analysis. Here's just a video I made my students make, just, I don't know, maybe make it pretty, even though it's quite small, but you can see it grows, and it's this dynamic process that I'm interested in. And it gets very big. So some math. So I'm going to use the notation GI to represent the graph that's built from the articles the articles / triples that's generated on DAI. So I can talk about the cumulative graph process, right? Of how, the cumulative graph from day 1 to day n is going to be the union of all the graphs that is collected from day 1 to day n, right? So again, it's this cumulative dynamic process that I'm interested in coming up with a way to mathematically model. Okay, so again, the problem is this is a graph. It's hard to mathematically model graphs. This graph is very large, and there's no way to model all the possible variables of this graph. So one way